Beyond the Ring, a podcast that covers all things in the stock show industry, from the informative to the insane, starring Ryan Rash.
I mean this with all sincerity. If it is textable, for the love of God, don't call me.
And Dale Hummel.
Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored.
Now on with the show.
Welcome to Beyond the Ring. This is Dale Hummel, along with co-star Ryan Rash.
Hello, hello, hello.
Welcome to the world of current events.
Since Dale has not paid attention to any current events, I do have a few. First off, the polls are continuing to tighten. It's getting closer and closer, which I guess is a good thing. I'm not sure, but it's very, very tight. In the swing states, it's tight in the national polls. So I find that encouraging. I do not believe there is going to be another presidential debate, which, as I stated last week, only 3% of the people that watched had any effect on maybe who they would vote for. Dale brought up some vice president debate. I'm not even going to tell you what I think about that, and I will not be witnessing that because these are the two biggest buffoons that have ever been nominated for vice president in presidential politics history. But
go ahead and speak your mind about the vice president candidates, okay? If you don't
I
mind,
don't think you want me to because
tell us what you think about them. If you don't
I do not think you want me to because this is supposed to be kid friendly.
It is. So, this is not Beyond the Circus. This is kid friendly.
And so, yeah, I don't really think you want me to. Camel Toe, speaking of kid friendly, did go and have an interview with Oprah. Imagine that. And Oprah thought she was wonderful and beautiful and amazing and going to save the world. Shocking. I know we're all just stunned. But there was no substance to it. There was no nothing to it. Our president, if you can call him that, had an event with a world leader, and he got confused and disoriented and forgot to introduce said leader and screamed at his staff, "Who am I supposed to introduce now?" And it's all over Twitter.
While on stage, ready, basically when he should have been introducing when everybody's watching him.
Right, yeah. It was great. It was lovely.
I want to circle back just a second about the Oprah interview. I did not watch the entire interview. I didn't even know when it was, but I saw plenty of clips from it, and it looked laughable, I guess is the best way I can put it. I thought I'm sure that Fox played the worst of the clips. I'm not trying to pretend that they didn't, but when asked a question from real people, not the actors or actresses, but a couple basically asked a question about how she plans to bring down the cost of groceries or inflation, something relative to that. And she gave her usual non-answer. But watching Oprah's face, it's almost like I thought she was feeling the pain for the chameleon. Just the fact
there was a visible reaction.
Yes. And do you agree? Oprah's thinking like, don't go down this path. Answer the question.
Well, that's all of her answers to that question are basically the same.
Did you know she grew up middle class?
Yes, she grew up in a middle class family
where
they cared about their lawns. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's going to save the
have you
save the economy. No, I've heard it. I've seen it. But there was a visible facial reaction from Oprah. You will be very happy to know that the pagers are still blowing up the terrorist, which you did not think you gave enough credit to. So
no, and I was going to address that.
Go right ahead, please.
I heard
by
something
all means.
That they were also blowing up some walkie-talkies that they switched out to.
Please, by all means, go ahead and give your love for all of this.
I absolutely will. When an organization in Israel, I don't think they're denying it. I don't think they're taking credit. I don't know where they're at, but clearly it appears as though they were the ones behind the forward thinking to put explosives in pagers and get them to Hezbollah. And I think it was brilliant to go on the offensive. I think less lives are lost this way than waiting until a major attack and then wiping out an entire country. So I'm all on board. I heard something about walkie-talkies blowing up as well. Brilliant. And I think it's got to scare the living shit out of the terrorists that finally somebody's going on the offensive. They've never really had to worry about it until after they did the damage. I'm much more in favor in going on the front side of it. and I appreciate what they're doing. I don't think our White House is going to back them up on any of it, nor say they support it. I think they're avoiding it like the plague. Nothing that I've heard about that in terms of, hey, nice job fighting the terrorists for us. Brilliant, in my opinion. I'm assuming this happened, and I saw a time frame on it. This was put into action several years ago. It is my hope that they've got multiple things. I don't think they're just going to target one thing, but hopefully there's several things that will keep those terrorists thinking, wow, this maybe isn't a good thing to be doing.
That's all you have?
Yeah.
You gave me a 30-minute rant.
Thank you, Israel. I am certainly going to compliment them rather than try to shame them for doing it. If you'd like to shame them, that's okay.
It was much more passionate to me, and he said much more glorious things about this, but we will move on. It looks like the government will not shut down for the time being, that they're probably going to avoid that. Yay, I guess. I really don't care because I think Speaker Johnson is an idiot, but evidently he has avoided a government shutdown. The most important part of current events, for me at least, everybody here knows that Michigan is a pretty important swing state, I would think. And today, the mayor of a Detroit area suburb, who is a Muslim, came out and endorsed Trump very vocally. And again, I don't know if that will swing Michigan in his favor, but it can't hurt.
Nope, I think with
and I would pronounce his name, but I can't. I'll give it a go. It's like Amir Ghalib, but yeah, I probably butchered that, but yeah.
There's a group opposing the stance on some of the Muslims that are very upset still with the chameleon. Hopefully the combination of some of those things, maybe it works.
It can't hurt.
No, we'll take everything we can get. Do you have any other current events, or do you have BTR JLA news?
Well, I have one other thing. Trump also said that he would not run in 2028 if he got beat.
I did not hear that.
Yep.
Donald Jr.?
It's now or never. So I'm just letting you people know, you people that like Trump, you better get your asses out and vote.
I would agree with that. And I do have, my son Dylan has been making calls on behalf of the Republican Party, trying to get
Dylan is recalling Republicans in Illinois?
In Pennsylvania, actually, is where he's calling Republicans. Yeah, not in Illinois, just to make sure they're getting...
So much. You're so mean to him, and you're not nice to him, and you're a terrible father to Dylan, but Dylan is a good guy.
He does. I appreciate that he's making that effort, and basically, and I didn't understand what is going on, but he was here yesterday, and he was making those calls, so I could hear the calls. And there's going to be, I believe, liberals that hang up on him as soon as he identifies himself as a representative of the Republican Party. But there are plenty of Republicans out there in Pennsylvania that were very appreciative of it and had some good questions. And basically, I think from what I can tell, that the purpose of his calls were to make sure that if they applied he has information that they applied for a mail-in ballot, to make sure they receive their ballot and it's filled out and back in. And shockingly, the few that I heard, I don't know when the ballots were supposed to be there, but pretty much now, a lot of them had not received it yet. So I think it's good that they're just kind of giving them heads up. Hey, if you didn't get it, make sure to call somebody, check on it, things like that. So that is appreciated. I was going to post on probably our page, our Humble Livestock page, that link basically that you can go if you want to volunteer to do some of those things and help out. I think a big ground game is going to be needed. And I appreciate those out there doing it very much.
I do, because it is so close. I think voter turnout obviously will be a big factor. And then the other factor is who the independents will swing for. But I will say this, early voting has started in this election. And if you like camel toe, don't listen. If you are a Trump supporter, figure out, make a plan, and vote. I don't care what state you're in, not just the 7 swing states, all of the states. Make a plan and vote right now.
Absolutely.
But that is probably the worst current events ever in history, which is fine. Top 10 overall lambs. First place is Alan Morris from California. Addison Zertbach from Oregon is second. Charlie Fender from Nevada is third. Macy Zerbach from Oregon is fourth. Adele Simpson from Arizona is fifth. Holly Faye Switzer of California is next, followed by Piper Raymer of Washington, and then Tyan Kern of Nevada, Hadley Powell of Colorado, and rounding out the current top 10 is Sailor McCoy of Oregon. Now it is time for Dale to do his water boy duties, which is the most important part of the podcast in Dale's world.
Congratulations to those BTR JLA top tenors. That's impressive. I hear a lot of those same names popping up. ShowFresh H2O takes some of the risk out of the equation on what can go wrong hauling to a show. Look at it as an inexpensive insurance package that ensures your stock will drink at the show. This is simple, low cost, high return. Give ShowFresh H2O a try. You will not be disappointed. ShowFresh H2O can be found at your local farm store, show supply trailer, and at swampfox.com. We appreciate your support of the podcast and in turn the junior livestock industry. With that, we have a special guest with us today. We're in the Trending 2.0 series. Today will be the Lamb edition. We're happy to have Mr. Brad Angus with us. Brad will be familiar to many of our listeners from both the breeding sheep and market lamb arenas. Brad has sorted most of the national shows and Texas majors on the lamb side and occasionally will accept a major goat show. Brad has spent most of his professional career in academia, serving in the role as a livestock judging coach, animal science professor, and currently a department chairman. His passion beyond education is raising sheep, evaluating livestock, and his continued work with youth. Brad, we appreciate you taking the time to join us for our trending series.
I am excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
Brad, this is our second species. We have hogs already done, and we'll be doing goats and cattle here in the next couple of weeks. But just to kind of give you some idea on the direction we're going, Ryan and I are going to ask you some questions, some probably pretty easy, some difficult, but do your best to guide us. And we've had a lot of requests from our listeners to have this come back. Ryan, I'd say it was a year ago approximately that we did it, maybe a little longer the first time, but very, very popular. And I think this is on the minds of a lot of exhibitors in terms of what they should take out of their barn to the shows, and maybe more importantly, what kind of animals they need to select to put into their barn, and just some general information on the trends. Ryan, would you like to lead off the questions?
Sure. And before we get into that, on a personal note to Mr. Angus, I just want him to know that I have watched him judge many a Texas major and national shows, even a state fair too, and truly admire him because he is one of the people that I can go and watch a couple of classes, and after that, every single time I can very easily know which ones are going to go to the top, more classes than not, pick out his winner. He is accurate. He is authentic. Your consistency, sir, as someone who really cares about the people out there sorting shows, is really something that I have admired for a long time. So I am very, very grateful that you have accepted to be on here, and I am also a big, big fan.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know whether that's appreciated or deserved or not, but and by all means, call me Brad.
Probably, like when we had this with Cade 2 weeks ago, I judge a lot of shows and I get asked a lot of questions. And so the biggest question that I get asked when I judge sheep shows is, at the time being right now in the current state of things, is, will this shaggy wool thing continue to be probably one of the biggest trends? And so I would like to know, because that's the most prominent question I get asked. What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Oh, great question. I think it will probably continue for a while. I wish it wasn't. I understand the reasoning behind it. And I guess my frustration, maybe more as a breeder than as someone who's evaluating sheep in the ring, is that it frustrates me a little bit personally when I'm selecting bucks and selecting ewes to realize that if they won't generate quite enough leg wool, maybe they're not an option when virtually everything else about the sheep is really good. And that's a little frustrating to me. I think part of it, is the aesthetics. We've made these sheep a little smaller and more moderate for good reason, to make them show a little longer, to keep them at a more ideal weight at a greater number of shows. And I get that. And I think when you do that, and I was talking with some students I was working with on a judging team this weekend about trying to make sure bone match the body. When we make those critters a little smaller and a little more moderate and a little wider constructed, we need a little bit more in the lower part of their skeleton to make that all match. And what we found is the easiest way to do that is to put a little more wool on their legs. I'm not sure it's important. In fact, I know it's not that important, but it's certainly something that people gravitate towards. Like all things, I think we've taken it to an extreme, and I hope that it will moderate at some point. But I don't think in the near future that probably the discussion about leg wool is going anywhere or going away anytime soon.
And just to follow up on that, because I agree with what you're saying, the thing that fathoms me for the most part is, first of all, that you will actually hear judges say that in some judges in their reason say that this one's going to be second or third because they're not, shaggy enough legged or whatever, which I think is just ludicrous. But more importantly than that, I would think that it should be a goal for all people that step into a ring to sort shows that should be able to read through that, just like reading through a fluffy cow in a steer show or a heifer show, because having shaggy legs does not actually equate to that one being bigger boned or bigger footed. And it scares me a little that I don't think enough people understand that or realize that when they're sorting, and they just use that as the indicator for that criteria. And so that bothers me a little. I'm not going to lie.
I completely agree. I mean, if you've got somebody sorting a show who believes that leg wool is an indication of whatever term you want to use, bone work or foot size or stoutness of feature, and that's the criterion that they're using, then probably that's maybe not the right person to be judging those shows. I mean, you can still study true foot size. There are other indicators, whether it's skull or width of skeleton or a number of other things, to determine whether one is really heavy constructed or not. But I agree. I see a lot of particularly younger judges get really worked up on big legs in terms of wool and equate that to bone. And there's some of those rascals, if you just study them well enough at the ground in terms of their foot size, you realize they're really woolly legged, but they're actually not very heavy constructed.
And that's my point. And I have personally said sometimes on the mic that I realize this one's got shag like a Clydesdale's fetlock, but in actuality, this animal is not as stout featured or as big at the foundation in terms of foot and bone as the one that's above him or behind him. And so I appreciate that you agree with that. And I wish that while the shaggy legged thing is cool and it's a fad and we all know it, and you have to appreciate the hard work that goes into it, that those kids and those families put into it, just like the skin and hair on hogs that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. I think we also need to realize and call out when, while this is a great feature, maybe what's underneath that is not as impressive as what we think.
Well, one of the benefits that I think I have, and some people may not agree, is that, I got my start, or my early youth was in the breeding sheep world. And, if you watch breeding sheep shows, how much wool we have stacked on some of those sheep. And if you're skilled at that art, which a lot of people are, you can make them look nearly perfect from the side. But I still expect anybody who is sorting one of those events to be able to find one with a hole behind their shoulder, or be able to look at the indicators and realize that one is still bad hipped, or shallow flanked or flat sided. It's an art. It's great, but it's a judge's job to read through the presentation and figure out what's really underneath, and evaluate the sheep, or any species for what they are.
And Brad, I love that conversation, and the one point that you brought out, and I think we've pushed it maybe as far as you can push in terms of just how much shag we're going to put on there. I don't think it's necessarily ever going to go completely away. Moderate probably, and reel back just a little bit, maybe not quite as important, but for all the reasons both of you mentioned, that added aesthetics, and some of the judges that really just look at it as bone or stoutness or ruggedness, they're still going to be out there and still doing that. So it's still going to push breeders to continue to have those kind, and obviously they sell better, and it just kind of snowballs itself. But Brad, you made a comment that a little more moderate, a little more muscular, a little more dense, a little wider, and that helps proportion everything out, because we probably can't we can't do everything. If we've widened them up, we've got to get them a little bigger bone to make everything proportion and look right. And I think that extra shag, just as you mentioned, does give you that aesthetic, even though we know underneath the fact that maybe it's not going to be there. But it's interesting to me that, no question, they've pushed it a long ways. And the question that I have for you, Brad, kind of lends itself to this a little bit. I know for me anyway, when we have sheep coming out in the ring with that much shag on them, those that do a nice job of fitting that leg, they're going to fit a hind leg into it that looks very correct, very appealing, very functional, when in all reality, underneath that extra shag couldn't be a complete train wreck. So I think in some cases that's helping hide some screwed up hind legs. I think that the good evaluators are going to look through it, but there's plenty of people that are not going to look through that. With that being said, Brad, the limited experience I have looking over the fence at the big lamb shows and judging a few jackpots, I'm still struggling with how much emphasis and which direction it's going in terms of how those sheep move out of those hind legs, and how they tie up through their hip and into their spine, and that whole thing. So I guess it's more on the skeletal side. Where do you think we are now, maybe compared to a couple of years ago, or which direction do you think that's going? Or where do you want to be, maybe?
I don't want to ever find myself getting hung up on one trait any more than the other. I have always tried to talk about structure and skeleton in sheep. I think I hear more younger judges talk about it on the microphone. I am not always comfortable that I see in my evaluation of sheep on the other side of the ring maybe what they're seeing. I definitely think, and I'm not being critical of sheep judges in general, but I find that most of the top end of the cattle evaluators read structure fairly similarly. I see that. I feel like they do in the hog ring to some extent as well. There seems to be a lot of variation in judges on what is correct and what is appropriate structure in the sheep world. I'm going to continue to emphasize it. It's important to me. I think, it is the foundation of all livestock, whether we're talking about breeding livestock or market livestock as well. But there's some challenges in structure today as we've made these sheep wider. It's more difficult to keep their hind leg underneath them. We see an awful lot of sheep that want to bow out in their hock. Dale, you're exactly right. To me, I think if I'm fitting on one of these things, sure, the extra leg will add some impression of bone, but where I think it's allowed people to create a different perception in the show ring is you can, if you've got enough leg wool, you can take one that's a little too straight or got a little too much angle, and you can carve a hind leg out in particular and make one look, at least at the stand, quite a bit different than they really are. Something that the steer folks have been good at for decades. And I appreciate that, which to me means we need to spend more time with these sheep on the travel and evaluate them in that regard. I think the other thing that we've done is we've moderated these sheep and we put some emphasis on keeping their top lines together. One of the simplest ways to do that is shorten up their body. And again, I was traveling with a judging team a little bit this weekend, and we talked a lot about that. You know, when you shorten them up and you shorten up their hip, there's a consequence to that in terms of the angle to their hock, the way their pastern sets to the ground, and trying to get people to be able to evaluate that and understand those relationships to different parts of the skeleton. I think is something that takes some time, and you've got to educate people on in order to make them understand what real structure is.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And I think, Brad, for those that have watched you, and Ryan had made some comments earlier about the consistency. If someone were to ask me what type of lamb you're going to use, if they haven't watched you judge, I don't know. Obviously, it depends what's brought to you. And if you're at a Texas major or a national show, you're going to have some pretty good ones brought to you. So you can take one direction or another in terms of just your personal preferences. And maybe it looks like here's a little bit of a trend that you're going on. I don't know, Brad, watching you over the years, I'm not saying it hasn't changed at all, but your priorities have stayed pretty consistent on where you're at. And I'm assuming because you've done most of the big ones in your confidence level, you're still going out there and selecting exactly what you want to select, irregardless if somebody at a jackpot show is using the biggest legged ones that are full of wool or whatever it may be. Do you feel like you've held the same course, or have you changed over time the direction or the path that you're taking in terms of sorting?
I mean, I feel like I've tried. That's always an interesting question. You know, I've had that conversation with other young people that judge a variety of species. I feel like what's important to me and the image that is in my head of what I want my champion or my reserves to look like has stayed the same. But you guys both judge a lot of shows. Ryan judges more shows right now than anybody. You still have to work with what they bring you. You can't find one that isn't there. And sometimes that means you're going to have to deviate a little bit from that picture in your head. But fundamentals of balance and structure and enough power and compositional correctness has really always been important to me. It's cliched, but I've always wanted to use one that was pretty problem-free and tried to avoid being too out there, maybe necessarily in any one particular area. But again, you can only, and it is a big benefit. You guys have been to so many shows. It's so much easier to feel that way at the end of a Texas major or an Oklahoma City or the Royal or something like that than it is at a county fair, because sometimes those just don't exist at some smaller shows.
I think what you said right there and what Dale alluded to is that you still have to judge on what comes to you. I think that is something that I was trying to allude to earlier when I was talking about you. I've watched you judge a lot, probably a lot more than you even know. And that's what I said. After watching a couple of classes of you judging at that particular show, after you get the feel of the quality and after, you know what's pretty much have an idea of what's coming, you're just so consistent and easy to follow. That's what I truly admire, because like I said, from somebody sitting on the sidelines, I can sit there and go, you know what, that one's going to be top 5 and this one's probably going to win. And more times than not, I was correct, not because I'm a brainiac, but I can follow you. I can listen to you and understand what you're going for, and also read the room in terms of quality and things like that. But I think what you're saying is right. The fundamentals that you've always wanted to use have probably never gone away, but you do have to change within show. And there is some change throughout the years. And, I don't know if I said it on the podcast with Cade, but talking to Dale or a couple of podcasts ago, I said, I probably am never going to give up on soundness being my first priority, and then wanting them to be really good looking and sexy. But stoutness matters more to me in cattle now than the other species, because we've gone so far away, especially on the breeding side of it, that they're so flat and so one-dimensional for the most part, that I think it needs to matter. And so you're always going to have to change, and you're always going to have to readjust, but the core priorities are always there. And that is truly why I've just admired you so much, because like I said, I can watch a couple of classes, and I remember one time I was in OIE and steers were going on one side and sheep were on the other, and you were judging, and all of my friends and buddies were like, why do you keep watching the sheep show? I was like, because I can follow what's going on over here. The other side, not so much. And so, but I that's an attribute to you, and I appreciate you bringing that part out.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I just, I understand enough about this sport or this game that we're playing. It's families devote a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of emotion into getting these rascals ready. I don't care what species it is. And if they feel like they've watched a judge enough times that, particularly in Texas, where you many times only get to bring one, they want to feel like they've got a legitimate shot to hit somebody. And so when I watch people who kind of go off the rails and go a completely different direction, that's a judge's, his or her priority to do that, if that's what they want to choose to do. But I feel like that's doing a little bit of a disservice to making sure that we're putting on a good event. I want to try and be as consistent as I can, because I think that gives everybody who's coming to a show the best opportunity to feel like they've had a successful go at it.
Amen. Dale, I've got a lot of questions, but if you've got another one,
please go ahead.
Okay, so, and this is a personal question for me, and I don't know if you listen to the podcast or not, but we had one a few weeks back, maybe a month ago, about that. I feel like in all species that obesity is running rampant in stock show projects. I really think that it is a big deal in sheep. And I guess the thing that I would like for you to address, and you can tell me that I'm crazy or off base, whatever. While a lot of these sheep still handle firm or hard or all those things, if you actually handle them, despite the firmness, you can still tell that they're pretty fat. And that is something that I rail against and I do not like. And I would just like your personal opinion, because I think it is something that varies from region to region, even more than most things. But I would like your personal take on it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear they've gotten considerably fatter than they were, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I guess I'm dating myself. I've been doing this for quite a while. Don't get me wrong. I think there was a time in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, when we were too focused on making these rascals raw and bare. And we talked a little bit about shelf life and cooler and all of that. But we've certainly gone the other direction. In all species, if you can't make them thick enough, you just make them fat. And then people think that that in some cases that's the same thing. I totally agree. And boy, I give the folks that are exhibiting these sheep and the folks helping feed and the nutritional programs just incredible amounts of credit, because there's some of them that are awfully, awfully fat that can still handle remarkably well. But if you study them in the right way and you read the indicators and you get in the right places in the body, you can still figure out how much of that's genuine and how much of that's not. And I think for me, that's one of the reasons why I still put emphasis on, lower body proportions and the quality of the way that they're made up through their front end, because I think it's much, much more difficult to make one that kind and have that kind of look, have that much extra fat. If you're just going to simply stand behind them and width them and power them up, then I think fat becomes an easier thing to accept in the show ring.
So you just talked about lower body there. And so anyway, I just got done judging the Utah State Fair. And so the sheep that ended up third overall, just for personal perspective, that you handled impeccably. But if you got down on her lower body and sides, I said the one flaw I have in this sheep is if you handle her down low, she's pushing the edge for me in terms of fat cover. And so I appreciate that you brought that out, because I don't know if many people even think about that or analyze that, but I agree with you completely. And I think it's something that we need to take into consideration more seriously.
Completely agree. Totally agree.
Excellent, Brad. I have a question that's a little maybe off the beaten path, not necessarily a type question, but I don't even know if it's a trend, but I wanted you to address it because it hit me kind of odd, and I'd asked Ryan about it, and he's had the same situation. One of the last jackpot sheep shows that I was judging, a class of market lambs, one of the first classes entered the ring, or decent sized class, and they were coming in the ring, Brad, the kids were walking as fast as they possibly could, almost a jog, to where the sheep, trying to get the sheep basically to run from point A to B. And about midway through that class, we stopped things. I talked to him. I said, hey, let's walk these again. Let's slow down, and kind of explained that I wanted to see them move, but let's not make it a race. Is this something why is this happening, or have you witnessed this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've found myself feeling bad in the show ring a couple of times because I feel like I'm barking at some of these kids to slow them down. I mean, to me, the obvious reason is that they've got a sheep that doesn't look quite as good or travel quite as well, or they've got an angle problem, whether it's up front or behind, that they're convinced if they go at a faster pace that whoever's in the show ring isn't going to be able to catch that. And I put a lot of emphasis on these sheep as they travel. And so I want to really have an opportunity to assess them both from the side and from behind as they go. And when they're racing them around the ring, it's not at all uncommon for me to just point somebody out and say, slow them down. And I hope they'll do that the first time, but if I have to do it again, I will. Generally, what I find is the sheep that are traveling fast are sheep that have got a skeletal issue that they're trying to hide a little bit. And I'm fine with that. Every great showman's job is to try and accentuate the positive and hide the negative, and you do what you can. But I think it's really incumbent on judges, if they think they're going too fast, to slow them down so you get a chance to evaluate them correctly.
And I'm glad that Dale brought this up, because we had brought this up on another podcast. And I wanted to hear your thoughts, because I was going to ask a similar question, but I agree with you that somebody's told them run that thing as fast as you can, because there is a certain stigma that if the animal can move fast and it's sound, which is not correct. And I have said for years, regardless of species, that animal will go at the rate or pace that it's most comfortable to in terms of its structure. So that's the way that you should walk it, because it will look the best. But talking about racing them around the ring, and we talked about shag and leg hair and all these other things, do you think by not only racing them around the ring and the amount of shag that's on there, I'm on the other side of it, you're on the other side of it, Dale's on the other side of it, we also show these things to judges. But do you think that we've got to the point where using this leg wool or using this racing around the ring to try to fool judges has gotten to a point that we need to take a step back and say, hey, this is something that is important and we need to reevaluate it because we're not getting it right for the most part?
I'm certainly not going to, be the first to say we need to cut back on leg wool, but I certainly do agree. It is harder. It's certainly much harder today with the amount of leg wool that's there and with the speed that they want to travel these sheep to evaluate structure, especially for people that aren't comfortable or don't have a perspective or a line in the sand per se about where they want to draw the line in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. So I feel pretty comfortable reading through leg wool. Maybe there are others who aren't. I'm pretty good there. My perspective on the movement thing is, if you're judging they're traveling too fast, just slow them down. And if they won't slow down, then, that'll be the consequence. But I do think I see that more. Dale, you mentioned you saw that at a jackpot show. I see that more in situations where class sizes are smaller and there aren't as many sheep, and you can kind of get away with that. You get to the bigger shows where those sheep are more bunched up in the ring, and it's just more difficult for them to travel them at that speed, which makes it a little easier to evaluate.
Excellent. I can appreciate that a great deal. Brad, we had the chance to have you and your judging kids over here just a few days ago, and we had a great discussion about the skeleton up front and the shoulder, and I heard you visiting with the kids that we want them opened up in that chest and forerib, but we can't push that limit where they're what we almost call outside of their skeleton, or things start going kind of another direction. I think for the most part, and the question to you is, the lambs have pretty much kept that in check, where I think the goats maybe went a little extreme for a while and caused some issues. Do you see that in the lamb ring, that they're starting to get them so wide they're outside themselves, or is it stayed for the most part in check?
No, I think we've definitely, some of the sheep have gotten too extreme in terms of width up front. I want them to be wide chested, but I still want their shoulder blade to be laid against their body correctly. I still want them to be, have that cool look up front. The thing that's so challenging, and Dale, you know this better than anybody, is that these kids are so good at getting them driven and presented today. There's a lot of those that in the brace and on the profile can look pretty good, which again goes back to one of the reasons why I tell young people who are going to judge more of these goat and lamb shows, if that's important to you, put them on the travel, get them out and watch them come at you, watch them from the side. And those sheep that want to end up running downhill and open up in their shoulder blade and front legs are not traveling squarely coming at you, that's the way you're going to find that, is to put them in motion and watch their skeletons kind of come apart. But these kids are so good at gathering them up on the brace that it can be difficult if you're not willing to walk them. But I do think some of them have gone a little too far. Now, I would say, and I haven't seen them all, but I've watched a number of the big shows the last few years, watch a lot of them online when I don't get a chance to go. I do think that we are trying to get them back to a little higher quality build in terms of their front skeleton, in terms of the way their shoulders laid on them, the way their neck attaches to their body, and try and give them a little higher quality look up front. That's probably going to come at the sacrifice of some power or some width of skeleton. But for me personally, I think that's a move in the right direction.
Excellent. No, I appreciate that, and it makes absolutely perfect sense. Brad, is there anything that, I guess, when you think about that next show you're going to go out there and sword, or the next major or whatever, is one of the larger shows, when you're en route there, or it comes that morning and here's what's coming into the ring for you, you talk about that consistency. And I want to give another example, and Ryan and I have talked about this a little bit, and I don't know this, Brad, but I looking in from the outside, you've been very popular in the Texas majors on the sheep side, and even a few goat shows. And I think what we talked about, and kind of what I want to point out to the listeners, more of a statement maybe than a question, that consistency that you talked about, because of the time, the effort, the emotion that these families put in, sometimes as judges, and especially maybe, and I'm not picking on younger judges, but those that don't have their kids at home showing, or working with a family that's showing, sometimes we forget the incredible amount of time, effort, money, all of that goes into each and every one that comes into the ring at those larger shows. Usually that consistency that you bring, not just from the time you start that morning until it ends within the show, but the fact that last time you sorted one, this is where you were. You come in. I'm not saying it's going to be exact, but within reasons, those basics are still there. And Ryan, we've had Scott Greiner on here, and I think Scott's been one of the most popular major judges across species. And Ryan, why is he so popular?
I think it's just like we said, a consistent type and kind that when they announce Scotty G as a judge, then you know what you need to have.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of part of it.
And I think this example that we've just thrown out here, both very popular major judges, and I think the Texas majors, those in charge of hiring the judges, really seek to find that person that's predictable, or that family can hit, and at least like they have an idea what direction or what to bring to them. Where show families in the North, at least up until recent, it was more that here's the best one, period. I don't care who the judge is. Where for many, many years in the South, they continue to adapt what they bring to each and every judge. And I think that is so important to understand, because in the spectrum that we're talking about, both Brad Angus and Scott Greiner being popular at the Texas majors with a lot of the families and the show managers, because they are predictable. They're going to come in and be within the same range that they were last time, and people know what to bring to them. But guess what? In general, just in a big picture, they're at times a little, not at times, they're at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of where maybe their priorities are. In terms of Scotty G just really powering them up and open them up, maybe sacrifice a little look, and Brad kind of the other way. Let's get the balance and the skeleton and a little cooler look. And if they're not massive, that's probably okay. And it doesn't seem to matter to those families. I don't know that they like Scott over Brad or vice versa. It's fine because they know what to take to each of them. And I understand, Ryan, that's normal for you being in the South. Maybe Brad can help me a little bit here. In the North, the families haven't had as much of that mindset. And maybe it's because we have one state fair basically versus 5 Texas majors and a state fair where you can kind of shuffle different animals around to fit a given judge, where we've always had that mentality that, darn, we've got a good one and we hope that judge likes it, or we kind of expect him to, but it may not even be their type. And there isn't, in the past, there wasn't as much mindset, we're taking this kind to this judge. And I see a big difference between the North and the South in that, and appreciate the fact that those show managers make an effort to bring people in that kind of are consistent. Brad, do you see anything when you've judged in the South versus up here, or that general philosophy?
Yeah, I would agree. my trips to the South have all been fantastic. And, and you talked about Dr. Greiner, and I love Scott to death. I just respect the heck out of him. He's hired me to judge sheep shows before, and we talk a lot, and he and I have slightly different priorities. I'm never going to tell someone who picks them differently than I do that their kind is better or worse than mine. We just have different preferences. But I agree very much that I feel like when I talk to families after the shows are over at Texas Majors, their emphasis is, we just want you to be hittable. We just want to know what to bring you. And Dale, I do think, I grew up just the same way you did up here in the Midwest. I think a lot of our young people, unless they get a chance to go to Texas and Oklahoma and see the majors, it's hard for us to understand just how different things are in our part of the country. State fair was always the goal, but that was kind of it. You jackpotted and county faired, and you had a string of them, and you took them all to state fair. The whole major system is just so very, very different, and so I think that's part of what lends itself to that hittable piece. Here in Illinois, you buy a set in the spring, you feed on them, you think they're really good, and you go to state fair, and it's frustrating when the person that's in the ring just simply doesn't like that kind as much as perhaps you want to feed on one like that. So I agree with what you're saying. I certainly think there is a variation in what's important, but I think part of that is just the show format and the show system that we have in this part of the country versus maybe what they have more in the Southwest.
Absolutely. Ryan, do you have any more questions before we move on?
And I could ask Brad or Mr. Angus questions forever, but I won't. But I want to end with the same question that I kind of gave Cade. Nobody has a crystal ball, and nobody's, a fortune teller here. But so I'm not going to ask you what will be the next trend, because I think that's impossible. Because, like I told Cade, I don't think anybody could have ever forecasted that we would need hair on hogs like show steers. But if you could set a new trend in the junior livestock show industry for sheep, what would that be?
Oh, goodness. I knew you were going to throw one question at me that I had no idea how to answer. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. I wish that we could find a way to get a little bit more as an industry on the same page about skeleton and structure, and find a little more consistency across the board and across judges moving forward. That would be, I think that would help us all. I think that's one of the areas where I see the greatest variation from show to show, where somebody, and I'm paraphrasing, somebody describes one as a cripple at one show, and at the next show he's way more than adequate. And that I think in the sheep and the goat ring is something that causes a lot of frustration. This is just personal observation. I go to cattle shows, and you watch the same set of steers show week after week after week. Generally, the same couple of steers are gravitating towards the top every time. Some of these sheep shows, we can get incredible variation in the top end, and I think a lot of that is a variation on what is an acceptable and an unacceptable degree of structural correctness. And so that's one thing I wish we could all find a little more common ground on.
I think you're 100,000,000,000% correct. And while that wasn't what Cade's, if he could pick a trend, what it would be, we brushed on that. And what I said is, I think talking about judges and trends and all these things, for the most part, structure is the thing that is the one criteria or the one priority that should matter to all livestock judges, that is so out there and different in between us. And like I said, I can stand aside the ring and watch any species, it does not matter which one, and the person to the right of me can say that one's a cripple that's winning, and the person to the left of me can say, you know what, I think that one's plenty sound. And it should not be that way. We should be way more consistent on that. And so, again, your answer for me, just so important and so spot on.
I couldn't agree more with that statement. And at the same time, I believe that is going to continue to be our most difficult battle because of how subjective and where everybody, not only where they draw the line and what's sound enough, as you guys have both mentioned, we as individuals just do not see it the same in general. We can say which one's the heaviest muscled and which one's the tallest, which one's the longest. Those are a little easier to see, but for some reason, the ability to see skeletal correctness or define skeletal correctness in a similar manner just doesn't seem to happen. So I'm completely on board with that.
Well, I think, Dale, you and I shared some time together coaching judging teams, and Lord knows there wasn't anybody much more successful than that at that than Ryan was in his collegiate career. It's pretty easy, I think, with enough time to get young people to understand the differences in muscle and bone. I mean, those things are just more easily quantifiable. My experience in working with young people is trying to get them to just understand and see joints and angles and how all of that fits together. It's just a more difficult concept. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that everybody that's breeding livestock understands where they're at from a breeding program perspective in terms of structure, and then maybe it's something that they need to emphasize and focus a little bit more on. And I'm not saying I'm perfect in that regards either, but I think it's something that many people that I respect well just don't see and don't comprehend as easily as some of the other traits that we talk about in livestock.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ryan, do you have a BTR JLA sponsor before we go into question and answer?
I do. I was so wrapped up in listening that I have to find it. But we do have a BTR, or we do have a question and answer sponsor for the week, and it is Basic Animal Health and the Leonard family. And Basic Animal Health would like to focus on one of their supplements this week, Trailer Ride, which is an all-natural, complete health supplement originally designed to help animals combat the stresses of travel. The product has been found to have unlimited uses, including minimizing gastric distress, calming the animal for a safe and comfortable ride, and also boosting the immune system, supporting respiratory health, and it contains essential electrolytes which encourages that animal to drink on the way to the show and at the show. And so if you want to get Trailer Ride into your program, please go to www.basicanimalhealth.com and shop for Trailer Ride and all the Basic Animal Health supplements. And we appreciate them as a sponsor, and we appreciate the Leonard family.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard and family. Brad, so in question and answer, we usually go through three of these that we pull off of Facebook Messenger, text, email. That I would like you to stay with us because there is one that I pulled out that is definitely directed towards you, and it's our first one.
Okay.
This question comes from Jasper. Huge fan, appreciate all you guys do for the junior livestock industry. My question is, during the trending series, I would like to know from each of your guests, which we're already late on Kate, I didn't find this one in time or didn't come in time. I would like to know from each of your guests who they believe sets the trend in the species they're addressing. In other words, Brad, primarily in the market lamb ring, who determines the trend?
As in a group of people, I'm assuming?
I guess
I would think it would have to be. There's not one
the judge, or
yeah.
I mean,
yes, as a group, not an individual.
I think it's a collaborative experience, the changes and trends. Again, I think judges try to stay consistent in what's important to them. But I go back to something that I said earlier. You can only evaluate the ones that are brought to you. And so if the breeders decide to change, you're going to do your best as an evaluator to find the best one for you amongst that group. And I think that's a constant play back and forth between the folks who are breeding the more elite ones at that particular time and what a group of hopefully consistent judges are trying to do. But I think it's a back and forth tension between those people who are in the show ring more often than not in a given period of time and the folks who are breeding the top end of that particular species at that time. And it works in concert, and over time, then the trends shift gradually. And obviously, for those of us in the ruminant world, that trend change takes a little longer than it does in the pig world. But I don't think a judge can go out at one time and pick one uniquely wild one and convince the entire world of breeders that they all need to do that. I think it's a collaborative effort between the two groups, evaluators and breeders, that eventually shift it in that direction.
Excellent answer. And we've discussed on here, Ryan and I try to stay a little bit old school and think that there's got to be some basis for our trend or for what we use in the show ring in terms of the old school. Let's tie it to the real world somewhere, or to carcass traits or something. But I've come to the realization and somewhat surrendered that for the most part, and I've always been this way on the cattle side, I'm going to stay as real world functional as I possibly can and still make them attractive and still some show ring appeal.
I'm not sure you want to bring this up.
But on the goats, Ryan, I've always told you that I have there is no practicality in anything we're doing. We're simply breeding goats to fit what I think are national level goats that have a chance to win one of the big shows. And I promise you that by trying to breed for that image that is in my mind on what is likely to win a national show, we are fighting Mother Nature, and they are not practical. So Brad, I guess a follow-up question is, do you think there's what you said, I believe to be absolutely correct. Do you believe there's any tie at this point to any real world or carcass traits or anything like that? And if not, can it go any direction?
Well, yeah, my philosophy on this has changed over time. One of the biggest challenges for me, and it was for you too, Dale, I think, is that I spend one part of my life in this world, and then I also am an educator who's trying to teach students about real world commercial livestock production. And so it's impossible for me all the time to just simply separate those things. So I do my best in the back of my mind to try and pull industry related trends into the show ring. But boy, there's not much applicability in 2024 to what we're doing in this game related to the commercial world, especially on the small ruminant side. I love looking at these goats, but there's absolutely nothing practical or appropriate or commercially focused on what we're doing with meat goats in today's world in the show ring that equates to anything that somebody wants to do if they're raising commercial goats.
Agreed completely. And Ryan, you'd say that they've been disassociated since the beginning of time.
I wouldn't say that, but I would say it's a lot longer than what you want to admit.
Yes, I would agree. The next question comes from Glenn. I look forward to your podcast every Friday. I have not heard anything about bouncing kids in the pig ring recently. Did you guys fix the problem?
I don't know if we fixed the problem, but I can report personally, I have seen less of it, so maybe we have trended that down some. So
maybe
I don't know if we fixed it, but
aware if they're showing to you or it may
I
not
can
go
say
well.
at the Utah State Fair, there was no bouncing in the hog
None?
ring. None. I did not see one kid bounce.
Brad, have you seen the bounce in the pig ring?
I've
we're
seen
talking
it.
Oh, I
about?
know he has. He lives in Illinois.
I
I
have.
know he has.
I have.
It's
It's almost as
distracting is the
annoying
best I
as
can put.
the splits and the
Uh,
crouching thing in the sheep ring.
See, Dale was cutting us off, but that was something that I was going to bring up, and so and you can comment on this, Brad. But anyway, my thing is on the gymnastics or the acrobatics that go on into the bracing of the sheep and the goats. While I find it distracting, I really wouldn't care if that person that was trying to be Gumby actually was getting that sheep or goat to brace as hard as it possibly could. But we're doing all this nonsense and the animal's not bracing. So then you just look really stupid.
Yeah, I totally agree.
That's probably too blunt for Brad. But
No,
anyway.
I mean, I'm an old man and I get that, but even in my younger years, if you had a sheep that was worth his salt in terms of being able to drive in that position, that sheep just blow you right over. I mean,
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a pose, but I don't know that I ever have felt like it was adding anything to the touch and the brace of those sheep. In fact, I think in most cases it's working against them.
And the one thing that I tell every sheep and goat showmanship that I judge, and Dale sometimes fights me on this, but for the most part, you can walk up to that animal and tell if that one is actually bracing before you ever touch it, no matter what their position is in. I truly believe that, but maybe you disagree because Dale fights me on it.
Oh yeah, I think you can figure out pretty quickly whether that.
See, Dale, smart man
bracing
here,
or not.
very smart man, very smart man.
We fight on. You say you don't ever need to handle, not whether.
No, I said that you can tell if that animal is bracing or not. You're like, nope, 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 nope.
We get a pretend brace a lot of the times on what we're talking about, but I appreciate that question from Glenn spiraling into the splits and some of those other things. And there's obviously, and I don't think we can even poke it at the showman. There are people coaching them and telling them to do such, and that's the sad part.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, we as judges and people around the ring sometimes want to pick on these kids a lot, and there's very few kids making all these decisions on their own. Most of the time, that what we see in the show ring is a reflection of an adult, and they're the ones that really need some re-education.
Amen.
If there's not a practical reason for doing it, just don't. Just don't. Mary has the next question. I'm in the Northwest part of the country, and it's difficult to find many haulers that will make the trip this direction. What is the best method to locate haulers post online sales? Ryan, you want to get into the hauling business?
You are the one that has all the hauling business in the world because you have a sale every week. So
I do not have.
You have put Brad and I on the spot. I think it's your turn to put yourself on the spot.
Well, Mary, I can try here, and I am guilty. I'm not familiar with all the haulers out there, and it seems like there's new ones popping up all the time, and some going to the wayside. I think from the outside looking in, it appears as though if you decide to haul online livestock from point A to B and had a fairly full load, you're going to make a lot of money. So it's appealing on the outside, but I know just trying to coordinate and schedule and think about those haulers meeting that many people and trying to stay on, I don't think there's anything easy nor fun about it. Worrying about whether they get a load or not. And Mary, I think that the problem that you're facing is there's just not as large a volume of animals going that direction. So there's not going to be as many people hauling. Consequently, if they do come that way, they may not have as many on. They're going to have to charge you a little bit more for them. But if you're willing to drive, there's darn sure people from the Midwest hauling into Sacramento or out on 80 Sometimes there'll be a truck that'll go up into Oregon and occasionally up into Washington State, into Idaho, but they are harder. And as a breeder, we are working with many haulers, and I've accepted the position that sometimes we're just gonna have to hold those animals for a few weeks until a ride is going that way. And I would think most breeders are willing to do that just from that standpoint. If they're selling online across the country, that's become part of it. Would I like to get them all out of our barn as soon as we can? Absolutely. But that's probably not realistic. Mary, I would look on Facebook. I would try to talk to other show people in your area who they're using. And it seems like some will haul out to California, and then a second person may meet them there and haul up into the north. But it's hard. You are in one of the more difficult places to get to. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I really do not. With that, Brad, thank you so much for coming on. It's greatly appreciated. I know you're busy. I'm sure you've got classes in the morning. We're recording on a later Sunday evening because of everybody's schedule, but it is appreciated, and I hope the listeners enjoy the insight that you brought to it. I know I have, and it appears as though Ryan has as well. But until next week, be safe.
Y'all come back now, you hear?